Imagine, just for a second, imagine a man sitting in a concrete cell. He's totally isolated from the world for like 23 hours a day.
Right.
He's in solitary confinement down in a federal prison in North Carolina. And he's sitting there drafting these legal motions claiming that this incredibly intricate government-backed assassination plot is like actively trying to kill him using gang members.
It's wild.
It is wild, but now I want you to hold that image in your mind, and I want you to contrast it with this. That exact same man wrote one of the most universally beloved Grammy-winning anthems of the entire 1990s.
Yeah, a song that everyone knows.
Literally everyone. It's a song so deeply embedded in our culture that it's taught to little kids in elementary schools, you know? It's sung at high school graduations, in church choirs.
Yep.
We are talking about an artist who reached the absolute undeniable zenith of global fame, and now he's living out what sounds like the plot of a, I don't know, like a paranoid dystopian thriller movie.
It really is the ultimate paradox, I mean, when you look at it. You're looking at these two realities that, honestly, they just seem mathematically impossible to exist within the same human life.
Right, it doesn't compute.
No, it doesn't. Because on one hand, you have this generational musical genius. His work was literally the soundtrack to millions of lives. And then, on the other hand, you have a convicted racketeer and sexual predator.
Yeah.
And his entire carefully constructed empire was just completely dismantled. The juxtaposition is so jarring, and I think it challenges, our basic understanding of how society operates and who we choose to elevate.
It really does. So welcome to this deep dive. Today, our mission is to basically map out this complete staggering trajectory. We are going straight into the life of R. Kelly.
Let's do it.
We're going to track his path from his days as this functionally illiterate, dyslexic teenager busking in the Chicago subway system, all the way to his undisputed reign as the king of R&B, and finally to this monumental collapse.
And there is so much ground to cover.
There is. We are going to examine the cultural earthquake that was the surviving R. Kelly documentary. We'll break down those historic federal convictions that finally put him behind bars. And we're going to unpack these incredibly bizarre unfolding events from 2025 and 2026.
The recent stuff is just mind-blowing.
It really is. The stuff that has him locked in solitary confinement, alleging these massive murder plots.
And just so you listening know, to do this properly, we are pulling from a massive stack of sources today.
We had to.
Yeah, we've got really detailed investigative reporting from CBS News, AP News, Global News, and Court TV. We're also looking at the recent updates from The Source magazine regarding his current prison conditions, plus, extensive biographical archives that document his early life and his musical rise.
Because you really have to look at the whole picture.
Exactly. You need the entire ecosystem around him to even begin to understand how this happened.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to really comprehend the sheer magnitude of this fall from grace, we have to start by looking at those unprecedented, almost metalogical heights of his peak.
Right. He didn't just appear out of thin air.
No, he didn't just show up with a platinum record one day. There's this deeply rooted psychology to his artistry that explains so much about how he managed to captivate the entire world.
You really have to trace this all the way back to the south side of Chicago.
Yeah, let's go back there.
So, Robert Sylvester Kelly was born in 1967, and he grew up in the I.W. Wells housing projects.
Which was tough.
Incredibly tough. Is a really challenging environment. And his early life was marked by just intense struggle. Like, from an educational standpoint, he was diagnosed with severe dyslexia.
I don't think a lot of people realize that.
They don't.
Yeah.
He was functionally illiterate. He couldn't read or write.
Wow.
Which is a fact that, honestly, it makes his later success as one of the most prolific songwriters of a generation even more extraordinary when you think about it.
It really does. I mean, he's writing these huge hits without being able to write them down.
Exactly. And because of those struggles, he actually dropped out of high school after just 1 year at Kenwood Academy.
Which fundamentally alters his path, right? Like, instead of taking any kind of traditional route, he turns to the streets. He starts busking.
Yep.
He's literally performing for spare change under the Chicago L track. Specifically, it was the Red Line's Jackson station down in the Loop.
Which is so gritty.
Right. It's an incredibly humble beginning for a guy who would eventually sell, 75 million records?
Yeah, 75 million.
It's the classic American rags to riches narrative that the media absolutely loves to latch onto. But beneath that narrative, there is a much darker psychological undercurrent that's taking shape.
There really is. And what's fascinating, or maybe disturbing is a better word, is how much of his own trauma he actually put on the public record years later.
Yeah, in his book.
Right, if you look at his 2012 autobiography, Solar Coaster, The Diary of Me, he outlines this childhood that was just deeply scarred by tragedy and abuse.
He talks about his childhood girlfriend, right?
I does, a girl named Lulu. He wrote that when he was just 8 years old, they were playing near a creek, and she was actually pushed into the fast-moving current and drowned right in front of him.
Oh my God.
Yeah, he called her his very first musical inspiration.
I mean, I can't even fathom that. An 8-year-old witnessing that kind of horrific, sudden loss of life.
It's unimaginable.
That leaves a permanent, jagged mark on your psyche. It introduces mortality and chaos into a child's life in just the most visceral way possible.
It absolutely does. But the trauma he detailed went even further into his own home. He claimed that members of his household acted entirely differently behind closed doors.
What did he say exactly?
In the autobiography, he states that when he was 8 years old, he was sexually abused by an older female family member who coerced him into photographing her.
Wow, at 8.
At 8. And then around the age of 10, he claims he was sexually abused by an older male who was a friend of the family.
That's a lot for a kid.
And he wrote that he never told anyone because he's, quote, too afraid and too ashamed.
You read those details and you realize you're looking at this deeply fractured foundation.
Yeah.
You have the severe learning disabilities, the systemic poverty, this tragic loss of a friend, and then profound childhood sexual trauma all colliding before he even hits puberty.
Right. It's a recipe for disaster.
But yet the musical talent is just undeniable. It almost acts as this explosive escape hatch for him.
That's a great way to put it.
Like it's a way to process or maybe completely avoid the reality of his trauma.
It was entirely his escape hatch, and it propelled him incredibly fast. Like, his rise in the early 90s was meteoric.
Talk about that, because it happened so quickly.
It did. In 1990, he and his R&B group, they were called MGM, they won a $100,000 grand prize on this TV talent show called Big Break.
Which was hosted by Natalie Pohl, right?
Yes, exactly. And that single event gave him this massive national exposure. So by 1991, he had signed with Jive Records. And then comes 1993 and the release of his solo album, 12 Play.
Oh man, 12 Play.
We really have to emphasize how massive this was to anyone listening who maybe wasn't there. This album was a cultural reset for the genre. It sold over 5 million copies.
Insane.
And the single Bump and Grind became the longest-running #1 R&B song in over 3 decades.
I mean, if you were alive in the 90s, you couldn't go to a grocery store, a roller rink, anywhere without hearing his voice. He was absolutely everywhere.
Super.
And it wasn't just that he was making these catchy club hits. He had this musical genius that the critics instantly recognized as truly unique. He wasn't following trends. He was like actively inventing a new sound.
Right, because if you look at the musical mechanics of what he was doing, the critics praised his style because he took this incredibly pure, gospel-tinged vocal delivery.
Like church music.
Exactly. The exact kind of impassioned, soulful singing you'd hear in a church on Sunday morning. But he paired it with tightly arranged contemporary R&B production and these incredibly explicit, sensual lyrics.
Which is such a contrast.
It is. He was directly, openly influenced by legends like Marvin Gaye and Donny Hathaway. He wanted that smooth, soulful tone, but with a deeply sexual, gritty texture. And he mastered the alchemy of combining those two opposing forces.
And that mastery allows him to achieve the ultimate crossover. He doesn't just stay in the explicit R&B lane, right? He morphs into this global pop soul icon.
Yeah, the pivot is amazing.
Like, he writes, "You Are Not Alone" from Michael Jackson in 1995. And just to contextualize that for you listening, writing a song for Michael Jackson in the mid-90s is the absolute pinnacle of the music industry.
There was nothing bigger.
Nothing. That song makes Guinness World Record history as the first song to ever debut at #1 on the Billboard Hot 100.
Yep.
And then 1996 happens. I Believe I Can Fly is released for the Space Jam soundtrack.
That is the turning point right there.
Yeah.
That song transcends music. It becomes a cultural anthem. He wins 3 Grammys for it in 1998. He suddenly transitions from the guy making these late-night bedroom jams to the guy writing inspirational, sweeping ballads for Disney-adjacent family movies.
It's like he built this impenetrable cultural fortress entirely made of platinum records.
Yes, a fortress.
On one side of the fortress, he is the explicit R&B provocateur making Bump and Grind. On the other side, he is this inspirational pop soul icon making music your grandmother loves and cries to.
Right.
This leads me to a major question about how society functions, honestly. Did this intense duality, the fact that he was so universally loved across completely different, almost opposing demographics, did this actively help shield him from the early scrutiny that really should have stopped him in his tracks?
Unquestionably, that duality wasn't just a byproduct of his talent. It functioned as his primary armor.
How so?
Well, think about the psychology of the audience. When an artist is writing songs that make people feel spiritually uplifted, the public finds it incredibly difficult, almost physically painful, to associate that same person with predatory darkness.
The brain rejects it.
Exactly. The cognitive dissonance is just too vast for the average person to bridge. And that cognitive dissonance is exactly what allowed open secrets to fester in the music industry for well over a decade. And we have to be clear here, those secrets started very, very early in his career.
Exactly. Building that cultural fortress didn't just win him Grammys. It created a psychological shield so thick that the industry actively chose to ignore the red flags that began flashing almost immediately.
Almost from day one.
Let's look at 1994. He marries the R&B singer Aaliyah. The details of this, which, by the way, were reported widely at the time, are just objectively shocking. He was 27 years old. She was 15.
15.
Think about the sheer logistics of that. They didn't just quietly date. A marriage was arranged secretly at a Chicago hotel, and documents were actively falsified to make it happen.
Right, they lied on the certificate.
And it was annulled months later when her true age was exposed by the media, but he just kept going.
And you really have to consider the machinery around him that allowed that to happen in the first place. A 15-year-old and a 27-year-old cannot simply walk into a hotel and get married without adults in the room facilitating it.
Exactly. Someone had to book the room, arrange the officiant.
Right. Turning a blind eye or actively participating in the forgery of legal documents. It showed early on that his fame totally insulated him from normal consequences. And that wasn't the only turbulent relationship shielded by his status.
No, it wasn't.
In 1996, he married his backup dancer, Andrea Lee. That marriage eventually ended in a 2009 divorce, but it was amid severe allegations from her of physical, verbal, and mental abuse.
But the industry just kept rolling. The records kept selling. However, the moment that truly tested this armor, the real stress test of his invincibility, came in 2002.
The tape.
Yeah. The Chicago Sun-Times reported they had received a video allegedly showing Kelly having sex with a minor. This completely shifted the paradigm.
It did.
This wasn't a rumor whispered at some industry VIP party. This was physical, visual evidence.
Which naturally leads to a massive indictment in Chicago on child pornography charges.
Yeah.
And for virtually any other human being on the planet, a child pornography indictment backed by video evidence is the definitive end of the road.
You're done.
Your career is over. You become a pariah.
Yeah.
But because of the slow grinding of the legal system and the sheer resources at his disposal, the trial doesn't actually happen until 2008.
6 years later. And this 2008 trial is fascinating because it is essentially a masterclass in how fame, bottomless financial resources, and systemic intimidation can completely paralyze the legal system.
It really is.
Most people assume that if there is a video, it's an open and shut case. But despite the mounting evidence, R. Kelly was acquitted on all counts.
All of them.
And it wasn't a long, agonizing deliberation either. The jury came back in less than a single day.
Which is incredibly fast for a case of that magnitude.
So how does the legal mechanism of a trial fail so spectacularly in the face of literal video evidence?
Well, it failed because of the strict requirements of the law regarding evidence authentication. The prosecution had a fatal flaw in their case, and that was the absence of the victim. The key witness, the girl in the video, who we would later come to know in legal documents as Jane Doe number 1, she did not testify. She refused to take the stand.
And, I mean, we have to put ourselves in her shoes for a second. The psychological burden of walking into a highly publicized, media-frenzied courtroom to testify against one of the most powerful, beloved musicians in the city of Chicago.
It's terrifying.
The intimidation factor is astronomical.
Precisely. And without the victim there in the courtroom to point at the screen, to authenticate the video, and verbally testify to the jury about the abuse she suffered, the defense was able to exploit a massive legal loophole.
What did they do?
They just hammered on the concept of reasonable doubt. They questioned the video's authenticity, suggesting it could have been doctored or that it wasn't actually him in the footage. And without the victim's voice saying, yes, that is me and that is him, the jurors felt legally constrained.
They felt their hands were tied.
Exactly. They felt they couldn't confidently convict based on the prosecution's presentation of the tape alone. When the verdict was read, Kelly literally wept tears of joy in the courtroom.
This is the part of the story that just breaks your brain. Because after surviving a federal child pornography trial, you would think a person would retreat.
You'd think they'd lay low.
Yeah, they would live quietly in the shadows, thankful they avoided a huge prison sentence. But he does the exact opposite.
He doubles down.
He releases a triumphant autobiography. He goes on a massive, highly publicized tour with Jay-Z. He continues to churn out hit records. He's nominated for Soul Train Awards. He performs at major charity events.
It's baffling.
How on earth did the music industry, the record label executives, the radio stations, and just society at large logically justify looking the other way? Why didn't they just find another hitmaker?
Because of that deeply ingrained cultural dilemma we touched on earlier, combined with pure, unfiltered capitalism.
Money talks.
Always.
Hey.
He was making them money, yes. But society also genuinely struggles with the concept of separating the artist from the art. The AP News published a truly fascinating report examining this exact psychological challenge.
Oh, yeah, the AT report.
Right. They interviewed Paul Reiser Sr., who was a legendary Motown arranger. Reiser actually wrote the incredibly lush orchestral parts for I Believe I Can Fly and directed the backing musicians in Detroit.
That's such incredible insight, to talk to the person who literally built the emotional scaffolding of that song. How did he process it? It must be an agonizing position for a musician to realize the art they helped create is tied to this kind of darkness.
It is agonizing, and his response perfectly encapsulates the broader societal conflict. Reiser said that when he first heard the vocal track in the studio, he was blown away. He said, quote, "The lyrics are so simple, the melody is so clear. That song came from his heart. That's the other side of R. Kelly's."
Wow.
But decades later, when fully facing the undeniable reality of Kelly's actions, Reiser admitted he was deeply troubled and conflicted. Yet, he still struggled to dismiss the song itself. He called it a song we all wish we could write.
Yeah.
He said, "We have to separate the man and his humanity and his faults and failures from his genius."
Separate the man from his genius. I mean, it's a comforting thought, but can we actually do that? Or does that philosophy just become a convenient excuse to keep consuming things we like without feeling guilty?
That's the million-dollar question.
For a long time, the entire industry decided that, yes, they could separate it. They chose the comfort of the genius over acknowledging the humanity of the victims. But that willful ignorance couldn't sustain itself forever. The cultural temperature was slowly changing.
It was. And the turning point in this saga is vital to understand, because it wasn't a police raid. It wasn't a newly elected prosecutor deciding to finally take a stand. It wasn't even a new piece of forensic evidence.
No.
The catalyst that finally brought down the fortress was a piece of television.
The 2019 Lifetime documentary series, Surviving R. Kelly. This was the cultural earthquake.
Completely.
It completely bypassed the traditional gatekeepers of the music industry and the justice system and took the story directly into people's living rooms.
And the creation of this documentary is a massive story in itself. It was executive produced by Dream Hampton, along with Jesse Daniels and Tamara Simmons. And getting this series made was a monumental, grueling struggle.
I can imagine.
It wasn't as if people were lining up at the door, eager to speak out against him.
Right, because his power hadn't diminished. The fear of retaliation was still very, very real.
Exactly. The behind-the-scenes difficulty was immense. Producers Daniels and Simmons spent months, sometimes having phone calls lead into the night, simply trying to build trust with the survivors and their families.
They had to convince them it was safe.
Right, because many of these women had been silenced, threatened, or ignored for years. They had zero reason to trust the media.
None.
And when the producers tried to get celebrity voices to lend mainstream credibility to the documentary, the silence from the industry was deafening. Dream Hampton revealed that huge stars who had previously been critical of Kelly in private, people like Jay-Z, Lady Gaga, Erykah Badu, Celine Dion, Dave Chappelle, they all outright refused to appear on camera.
Which speaks volumes about the lingering fear of his influence or, perhaps the industry's collective guilt for their own complicity. They just didn't want to touch it.
No one wanted to be the first one to jump.
But some did step up. John Legend and Chance the Rapper appeared on camera and publicly, unequivocally condemned him.
He did.
And when the documentary finally premiered in January 2019, the impact wasn't some slow burn. It was instantaneous and massive.
The numbers are staggering. The
Yeah.
premiere drew nearly 2 million viewers.
2 million.
It became a national obsession overnight, dominating social media and news cycles. And the real-world consequences were immediate and tangible. The Rain Sexual Assault Hotline saw a surge in calls by up to 40%, in the days following the broadcast.
That is a staggering metric.
It is. The hashtag Meter Kelly movement, which, by the way, had been organized by black women and had been struggling for mainstream traction for a while, suddenly had this unstoppable wave of public support behind it.
Let's look at the mechanics of how that public support dismantled him financially, because it wasn't just people tweeting.
Right, it hit his wallet.
The dominoes actually started falling in boardrooms. RCA Records, his label, was finally forced to officially drop him. Artists who had previously collaborated with him, like Lady Gaga and Ciara, issued public apologies and actively pulled their collaborative songs from streaming services.
They scrubbed him.
Yeah. The music industry could no longer look away and count their money because the public was forcing them to watch the reality of the abuse.
And this shift highlights an incredibly important sociological dynamic about who we listen to and when we decide their pain is valid.
Say more about that.
Well, CBS News did some excellent reporting focusing on how this specific case intersected with the broader Me Too movement. In the early days of Me Too, many black women expressed profound frustration.
Right?
They felt their stories were being systematically ignored by the mainstream media, noting that the faces of the movement, the ones getting the magazine covers and the primetime interviews, were largely white Hollywood actresses.
That intersectionality is crucial to understanding why he got away with it for so long. R. Kelly's victims were overwhelmingly young black women and girls. That's a demographic that society has historically marginalized and failed to protect.
Yes. And the documentary bypassed the traditional media filters and finally centered their voices. It forced the viewer to sit with their pain. Lizette Martinez, who was known in court documents as Jane Doe No. 9, she was abused by Kelly when she was just 17 years old.
Wow.
And after the guilty verdict eventually came down years later, she articulated this perfectly. She said, "It's just a really great feeling to finally feel like we matter. We were heard."
That's so powerful.
It is. Me Too International released a very powerful statement regarding this exact dynamic. They said the verdict was monumental because, quote, "society is quick to minimize our suffering and abuse." They emphasized that after decades of dismissal, black women and children were finally being believed by the system.
It's a profound moment of validation, for sure, but it also forces us to ask a really uncomfortable question about how our justice system operates.
It definitely does.
Because as powerful and necessary as that documentary was, Dream Hanton herself made a really poignant observation on CBS Mornings. She said, "I want to believe that this means that black women and survivors will be heard, but I don't want it to be dependent on a piece of media going viral."
That's a chilling thought.
Think about the implications of that. Is it a fundamental failure of our legal architecture that it literally took a multi-part reality TV show to trigger actual legal accountability for crimes that were an open secret in the industry for 20 years?
It undeniably highlights a massive structural blind spot in the justice system when it comes to prosecuting powerful, wealthy men who specifically prey on marginalized communities.
Yeah, the system failed them.
The system fundamentally failed these women for decades. But what the documentary achieved was removing the political and social cover that Kelly had enjoyed for so long. It outraged the public, and that public outrage gave prosecutors the mandate, the momentum, and most importantly, the willing witnesses they needed to finally bring sweeping, aggressively structured federal charges.
And the charges they brought were staggering. We are talking about federal indictments in 2 different starts.
Which is rare to happen simultaneously.
This is where the legal reckoning begins, and it's fascinating because the federal government didn't just go after him for individual crimes. They essentially used a legal sledgehammer to dismantle his entire world. Let's break down the 2021 trial in Brooklyn, New York.
The Brooklyn trial is historic in its application of the law. Federal prosecutors didn't just charge him with individual assaults, which, can be really difficult to prove decades later.
Right. It turns into a he said, she said.
Exactly. So instead, they utilized RICO laws, the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act.
Now, for anyone not deep into legal theory, RICO is the statute specifically designed in the 1970s to take down the mafia.
The mob.
It's meant to prosecute the mob boss who never actually gets his own hands dirty but directs the violence from the top down. So, how does the government apply a mafia statute to an R&B singer?
They do it by proving that R. Kelly didn't just commit crimes in isolation, he operated a criminal enterprise.
Well, yeah, the enterprise.
The prosecution successfully argued that his massive network of managers, bodyguards, accountants, drivers, and personal assistants didn't just facilitate a music career. They functioned as a highly organized syndicate.
Wow.
And the syndicate was specifically designed to recruit, isolate, and physically trap women and girls for his sexual gratification. The jury heard from 45 government witnesses who detailed exactly how this machine operated. The sheer volume of evidence regarding the structure of his entourage was overwhelming.
When you look at the mechanics of how this enterprise controlled these women, it goes far beyond physical abuse. The details that emerged from that trial outlined a system of extreme psychological conditioning and forced labor that is deeply chilling.
The rules he enforced on his victims were horrific.
Yeah.
They were designed to completely strip them of their autonomy.
What were some of those rules?
Victims testified that they were strictly required to address him as daddy. They were forbidden from making eye contact with other men. They could not eat a meal or even use the bathroom without seeking his explicit permission.
That is just complete subjugation.
It is. When they were not actively accompanying him, they were forced to wear baggy jogging suits to hide their bodies. He systematically isolated them from their families, he controlled their finances so they had absolutely no means of escape, and he recorded many of the sexual encounters to maintain permanent leverage over them through the threat of extortion.
It's the definition of a captive environment. And the charges went even further into federal jurisdiction. He was convicted of Mann Act violations.
Which is a huge deal.
Yeah, to clarify, the Mann Act is a federal law that makes it a crime to transport anyone across state lines for illegal sexual activity. They proved he was flying minors across the country using his enterprise's resources. And horrifically, it was proven in court that he intentionally transported victims and engaged in sexual activity without disclosing that he had an incurable sexually transmitted disease.
The prosecution built an ironclad narrative of systematic, enterprise-level abuse. The jury in Brooklyn convicted him on all 9 counts of the superseding indictment.
And just to clarify for everyone, a superseding indictment simply means the grand jury replaced their original charges with a new, broader set of charges as investigators uncovered even more evidence of the enterprise's scope.
Right. And the result of these convictions was a 30-year federal prison sentence. For a man in his mid-50s, that is essentially a life sentence.
Basically, yeah.
But the legal reckoning still wasn't over.
No, because in 2022, he had to go back to where it all started. He had to face trial in his hometown, the Chicago trial. Looking at the timeline, this feels almost like a dark, inevitable sequel to his 2008 acquittal.
It really was a full-circle moment for the justice system. In Chicago, he was facing federal charges of child pornography and enticement. And the most dramatic moment of this entire trial, the moment that offered the most profound true closure to this decades-long saga, was the return of Jane Doe.
Jane Doe number 1.
Yes.
The young girl from the 2002 video. The exact same victim who did not testify in 2008, which was the primary reason the jury felt they had to acquit him.
Yes. But in 2022, the dynamics have totally changed. Jane Doe is now 37 years old, and this time she walks into the courtroom and takes the stand.
Wow.
She publicly identified herself to the jury as the 14-year-old girl in that infamous video. She testified that she had first met Kelly when she was just in junior high school and that she had been abused by him uncountable times, hundreds of times before she even turned 18.
Hundreds of times.
Her testimony was the linchpin that the 2008 trial was missing.
You have to deeply respect the incredible, monumental courage on her part. To carry that trauma for decades, to watch him celebrate his acquittal, to see him continue to be a star, and then to come back as an adult and face him down in a federal courtroom, that takes immense strength.
Unbelievable strength.
Now, the mechanics of the Chicago jury's decision are interesting. They did actually acquit Kelly and his co-defendants of the specific charge of fixing the 2008 trial. They felt there wasn't quite enough concrete evidence of a criminal conspiracy to obstruct justice back then. However, because of Jane Doe's testimony, they found him guilty of the primary devastating charges: 3 counts of producing child pornography and 3 counts of child enticement.
And for those specific convictions, the judge handed down an additional 20-year sentence. However, the way federal sentencing math works can be complex.
Yeah, how does that add up?
The judge ruled that 19 of those years would be served concurrently with his New York sentence, meaning he serves them at the exact same time. So it effectively added only 1 additional consecutive year to his time behind bars, bringing his total functional sentence to 31 years. His projected release date was officially set for December 2045.
So if you are a rational person following this timeline, you look at that 2045 release date and you think, okay, the story ends here.
The book is closed.
The king of R&B is locked in a federal penitentiary until he's nearly 80 years old. The victims finally have their justice. The criminal enterprise is completely dismantled. The fortress is gone. Roll the credit.
But the credits didn't roll,
They did not.
because the updates we have from the years 2025 and 2026 take this narrative from a tragic true crime story and spiral it into something that resembles a paranoid political thriller.
Exactly. Now, I want to pause right here and make something incredibly clear to you listening. As we get into these legal filings from 2025 and 2026, we are navigating a very strange maze of defense motions.
Yes, very important.
We are strictly looking at the narrative his legal team is actively pitching to the federal courts. We are not validating these massive conspiracies as facts, and we are absolutely not taking sides. We are simply dissecting the legal strategy on the paper they submitted to the judge because the claims they are making are wild.
Right. Our objective is just to examine the original source material, the literal court documents filed by his defense. We are impartially reporting what is in the filings. So, with that understood, let's look at the absolute chaos that erupted in June of 2025. On June 10th, 2025, Kelly's attorney, Beau Brindley, holds a press conference and officially files an explosive 20-page emergency motion in federal court in Chicago. And when we say explosive, it reads like a Hollywood script.
The central claim in this motion is just staggering. The defense alleges that high-ranking officials within the Bureau of Prisons and the Department of Justice actively orchestrated a plot to murder R. Kelly while he is sitting in federal custody.
And the immediate question is why? Why would the government do that?
Right.
Well, according to Brindley's filing, the government's motive was a massive cover-up. The defense alleges that federal officers previously stole attorney-client privilege communications.
Which is a huge accusation.
Massive. They claimed the government then illegally used these stolen communications to coerce and manipulate key witnesses into testifying against Kelly during his trials in New York and Chicago.
Okay, so they're saying the trials were rigged.
Essentially, yes. The defense's overarching theory is that once Kelly's legal team began uncovering this alleged massive misconduct, which, by the way, they're planning to use to demand a full retrial and vacate his convictions entirely, the government sought to eliminate Kelly to suppress the evidence of their own constitutional violations.
It's a massive escalation of legal strategy. And they don't just make a vague claim, they name specific hitmen.
They do.
The motion claims that prison officials actually approached two members of the Aryan Brotherhood gang inmates named Michael Glenn Stein and David Keith Harris and explicitly instructed them to carry out the hit on Kelly inside the prison.
The level of detail in the filing is what makes it so bizarre. The defense claims that one of these inmates, Michael Glenn Stein, actually approached Kelly and confessed the entire plot to him.
Just walked up and told him.
Yep. According to the court filings, Stein is suffering from terminal cancer. The defense alleges that Stein signed a sworn declaration under penalty of perjury admitting to the murder scheme, claiming that prison officials promised him an escape and freedom in his final days in exchange for assassinating Kelly.
Just let the mechanics of that sink in. An Aryan Brotherhood gang member with terminal cancer signing a sworn declaration about a government-sponsored hit against a black R&B singer.
That sounds made up.
It does. And attorney Brindley stands in front of reporters and essentially says, these are not idle threats. These are real solicitations of murder by individuals inside the very justice system that is supposed to protect prisoners. He demands Kelly be released to home detention immediately, arguing his life is in imminent danger every second he remains behind bars.
And if that wasn't enough, the timing of what happens next is what makes the situation truly chaotic.
The medical thing.
Yes. Just 3 days after that emergency motion is filed, on June 13, 2025, R. Kelly experiences a severe, life-threatening medical emergency.
Right. He has suddenly rushed from the federal prison to Duke University Hospital following what appears to be an overdose.
The defense immediately supplied their narrative of how this medical event occurred. They stated that on June 10th, the exact same day they filed the murder plot motion, Kelly was abruptly pulled from the general population and placed in solitary confinement.
Okay.
They alleged that while he was isolated in solitary, medical staff initially gave him his regular prescribed anxiety medication. But then on June 12th, they inexplicably increased the dosage significantly.
And according to the defense's timeline, this increased dosage caused him to experience severe dizziness, total vision loss, and eventually he collapsed unconscious in his cell.
When he was transported to Duke University Hospital, the medical evaluations reportedly discovered blood clots in his lungs and legs. These are serious, life-threatening conditions.
Very serious.
Yet, despite these severe medical findings, The defense claims Kelly was abruptly discharged and returned to the prison just 2 days later, on June 15th, completely against the advice of the treating medical professionals at the hospital.
So his lawyers immediately fire off another emergency motion to the judge, citing extremist treatment and grave concern for his safety. They are essentially arguing, we explicitly told the court they were trying to kill him, and 3 days later he ends up in the hospital with an overdose and blood clots. The optics, from the defense's perspective, look incredibly suspicious.
And that intense legal friction brings us to the most recent update from February 2026. According to a detailed report by The Source magazine, on February 14th, 2026, the Bureau of Prisons officially transferred R. Kelly to the Special Housing Unit, which is commonly known as the SHU at FCI Butner in North Carolina.
Now, we need to explain what the SHU actually is, because it's not just a different cell block. That is hard solitary confinement. We are talking about a human being locked inside a concrete box for 23 hours a day with virtually zero human interaction.
Exactly. When an inmate is placed in the SHU, their access to phone calls, visitation rights, and basic institutional resources are heavily restricted or entirely cut off.
Did the prison say why?
No. Federal prison officials declined to provide the media with a specific reason for this housing change, citing privacy and security protocols, and they refused to say how long he will remain in solitary. But for Kelly's legal team, the implications of this transfer are severe.
How so?
Attorney Bo Brindley reported that he only learned of the transfer shortly before his scheduled legal visit, throwing their communication into complete chaos.
Because they are still actively fighting for a retrial in the Chicago case, right? They haven't given up on overturning this.
Yes, his projected release date remains 2045, but they are aggressively litigating to vacate the convictions entirely based on these massive allegations of government misconduct, stolen communications, and witness coercion.
So they need to talk to him.
Exactly. Brindley claims that placing Kelly in the SHU isn't about prison safety. He argues it is an intentional retaliatory tactic by the government to isolate him, break his spirit, and severely complicate the legal team's ability to communicate with him and prepare for these ongoing high-stakes legal battles.
It's just wild. We have a Grammy-winning R&B superstar locked in a 23-hour-a-day concrete box, while his lawyers are firing off federal motions about Aryan Brotherhood assassins, forced medical overdoses, and deep state DOJ corruption.
That's a lot to process.
When you look at all of this, setting aside the legal truth of these spectacular claims for a moment, what does this environment tell us about the absolute chaos surrounding Kelly's current reality?
It tells us something profound about the environment he creates around himself. The reality distortion field that R. Kelly successfully operated within for 30 years on the outside hasn't disappeared. It is simply relocated and adapted to life behind bars.
That is a fascinating point.
For decades, he lived in an environment defined by extreme paranoia, absolute control, and manipulation, constantly surrounded by enablers who reinforced his worldview. Now, that exact same chaotic energy, the grand conspiracies, the intense allegations of plotting and victimization have mutated to fit his new environment within the federal prison system. Whether these claims are the desperate, fabricated Hail Marys of a man cornered by his own actions, or whether there are genuine institutional failures occurring at FCI Butner, it proves that the drama, the darkness, and the sheer noise surrounding him remain profoundly untethered from anything resembling a normal existence.
Untethered is the perfect word for it. It's just a staggering amount of darkness.
It really is.
Let's zoom out for a second and try to synthesize this entire journey. We've traced the arc of a man who literally rose from busking under the Chicago L tracks to absolutely defining the sound of a generation of R&B and pop music.
He was at the absolute top.
He built a cultural and financial fortress so strong that it literally deflected federal criminal indictments, it silenced critics, and allowed open secrets to operate in plain sight for decades. But ultimately, that fortress was dismantled brick by agonizing brick. And it's crucial to remember that it wasn't dismantled by the music industry executives or initially by the courts. It was dismantled by the immense, unwavering courage of the Black women who refused to be silenced any longer, aided by a documentary team that bypassed the gatekeepers and forced the entire world to stop looking away.
That, above all the legal drama, is the true legacy of this story. It is a powerful testament to the sheer force of survivors stepping into the light, even when the entire cultural and legal system is heavily weighted against them.
Absolutely.
But as we close this deep dive, examining the complete collapse of his empire, it leaves us with a profound, lingering question to ponder.
What's that?
When an artist's catalog is so deeply woven into the very fabric of our culture, when a song like I Believe I Can Fly is still played at weddings, at graduations, and beloved movies, embedding itself into our core memories, what happens to that music when the artist himself is permanently excised from society
Hmm.
and locked in solitary confinement?
That's tough. Can we ever truly separate the art from the artist? Or will every note of his music, no matter how beautiful or uplifting it sounds, forever be haunted by the long, dark shadow of his crimes?
It is a question that deeply challenges our relationship with the media we consume and the moral allowances we make for genius.
It certainly is. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the narratives behind the headlines, and we will see you next time.